Hello everybody and welcome to Norden. Now today is the Sunday, which is the final day in the Swanage Railway Diesel Gala. Yes, I am back at the Swanage Railway for 2025, however, as you may notice, I'm not even at Norden Station yet. It is currently 8:20 in the morning, 55 minutes before the first train out of Norden, heading towards Swanage, and the reason why I'm here 55 minutes before the first train out of Norden is because I decided to get the bus from Poole instead of getting a lift with my parents, because on this channel we like to do things with public transport, and well, getting a lift from the parents isn't really doing it by public transport. So that's why I'm at Norden 55 minutes before my train, because that's basically how the buses work, especially on a Sunday. To be honest with you, the local area around here is lucky to get a bus service on a Sunday. If it was in Somerset, they would be lucky to get a bus service on a Saturday. Anyway, it's only about a 5-minute walk from the bus stop, which is located on the main road between Wareham and Swanage, to Norden Railway Station. Now, I can't remember when the Swanage Railway closed, however it did close when it was operated by British Rail, but shortly after, a group of people basically decided to buy the line off of British Rail, and they did a lot of work to get the Swanage Railway back open again. Originally, there was no tracks or anything. The stations at Corfe Castle and Swanage were completely disused and weren't in a good way, but eventually, bit by bit, the line was reopened along with the station at Harman's Cross and Hurston Holt. And then a few years later, the line was extended that little bit further from Corfe Castle to Norden to serve the Purbeck Park as well as the local park and ride facility. Anyway, here is the first train arriving in from Swanage, which was actually an ECS movement. It didn't have any carriages on it, and this was a Class 56 of a Polish Rail. Here is my train arriving into Norden from Corfe Castle and Swanage at around 8:50 in the morning. This was formed by 20066, and this would form the first service out of Norden at 9:15. trundling along the old Swanage Railway in between Norden and Corfe Castle. I'll be getting off this train around halfway through the journey at Harmon's Cross, where I had a very tight connection which almost went a bit wrong. Here I am arriving into Harmon's Cross. I'd have a little bit more time later on to explore the station and the local area. However, I had around a 5-minute connection here and our train ended up arriving in around 5 minutes late. For some reason, a lot of the trains on this day were getting held outside of Harmon's Cross in both directions, which meant I had to sprint across the footbridge, which isn't exactly an easy task. Luckily, there are a few other people doing this. However, as I got onto the other platform, I basically gave up. And then I noticed the train hadn't actually started to move yet, so I decided to run for it again and just made the train with a few seconds to spare. Here I am departing Harmon's Cross, going back up the line one stop to Corfe Castle, which although it's quite a nice station, does get a little bit boring after you've been there a few times. On the front of this train was Old Network South East 47715, and on the rear of the train was D6515, which is a Class 33. Along with the Class 33 on the rear, leaving Corfe Castle to head up the line to Norden. During 2025, the trains on the diesel Gala were only going as far as Norden and weren't going up to the border with Network Rail on the main line near the River Frome due to track repairs that had taken place recently. I'll be going on the Class 47 a little bit later on. Despite what the announcement is saying, here is 50008 arriving into Corfe Castle to take me back up the line to Norden. I believe that this was an express service and did not stop at Hurston Holt and Harmon's Cross. What I found quite fascinating is that I'd actually seen 50008 back in September 2024 when I went to see the new Ashley Down station. Just before we departed Corfe Castle, D6515 entered the station on the 10:06 service heading in the other direction. Here I am arriving back into Norden at around 10:15, an hour after I left the station on the first train heading towards Swanage. At this moment in time, I had been on 4 of the trains at the Diesel Gala, with these trains being the Class 20, the Class 33 technically, the Class 47, and now the Class 50, otherwise known as Thunderer.
No, that makes me 5 seconds.
Here is 56090 leaving Norden on one of the services heading towards Swanage via Corfe Castle. Here we don't have Corfe Castle station, but we do have a magnificent view of Corfe Castle itself. Here is 47715 back again, parked up at Norden. This would be my chariot to take me from Norden back down to Harmon's Cross. Meanwhile, heading into the station, going in the other direction, is the West Coast Railway's Class 37. I think this is the best loco, along with the 20 and the 50, and this was an absolutely amazing train. I also quite like the livery, however I'm not too sure if the coaches fit in very well. Here I am leaving Norden Station, heading back down the line towards Harmon's Cross via Corfe Castle. Most of the stations along the line are original, but I believe Hurston Holt was built a little bit later on after the line reopened, but correct me if I'm wrong, and I also believe that Norden was not an original station on the line. Although it has a heritage theme to it, it was built a little bit later on when the line was extended beyond Corfe Castle. This was to serve a new park and ride facility as well as the nearby Purbeck Park. Arriving into Harmon's Cross once again, arriving in a few minutes late because we were held just outside the station for no apparent reason. There may have been a reason, but it wasn't very obvious.
I've only timed one 2+8 set, and it's my third fastest time.
Here is the view from the Corfe Castle end of the station, where there is a nice old preserved signal box and an old barrow crossing. Here is 69007 passing through Harmon's Cross Station at a relatively fast speed for a heritage line. Here the train did have to slow down a little bit though, so that the train could get the token to travel on the single track between Harmon's Cross and Corfe Castle. Here is a really cool destination board. I find it quite good that a heritage line still has some of these modern features. The West Somerset Railway could do with these, especially when their trains get delayed or cancelled, which they sometimes do. Not so much cancelled, but usually delayed for some reason or another. What I didn't know, however, is that these screens are powered by real-time trains and not some other source, which I thought they would be, or the Swanage Railway themselves.
This train will call at Corfe Castle and Norden. The accessible space on this service is in coach C, in the middle of this train. Platform 1 for the 11:44 service to Norden.
Here is 20066 arriving into Harmon's Cross on its journey back up the line towards Corfe Castle and Norden. You could hear this machine from miles away. Here is 37706 arriving into Harmon's Cross in the stunning West Coast Railways livery to take me down, finally, to the end of the line at Swanage.
Please contact the guard before departure. This stop is a request stop. The accessible space on this service is included. Middle of this train.
Here is the train leaving Hurston Holt to head down to the main station in Swanage, with Hurston Holt being on the outskirts of the town. As we arrive into Swanage, 47715 is getting refueled, ready for its next departure. Here I am now at the end of the line in Swanage, where the station was extremely overcrowded. However, eventually I did manage to make my way up to the other end of the platform. Now, I'm not sure if you can see this, but I wasn't planning on getting on the Class 73 anyway. However, just for your information, the Class 73 didn't have a driver, so in the end, its only journey of the entire day, I believe, which is the 15:45 from Swanage to Norden, was now going to be hauled by the Class 69 that we passed earlier. Here is Class 33 D6515 leaving Swanage a few minutes late on a service heading towards Norden. Here I am leaving Swanage on 56090 along with the full vet. This is a very interesting train which has been preserved. However, I don't believe they have the equipment to be able to run it on the third rail network just yet. However, they are taking donations. I gave them a couple of pennies, which is, well, I quite like this train to be honest, and it'd be quite nice to see it running around on the southwestern network.
Yeah, it is a bit of work. So I said, I'm not paying the taxes, now what are you going to do to me? I'm going to lose the into the tax. Yeah, I know. You're never going to win. She is a dickhead. Oh, yeah, she comes with yeah, that was always very good. So all them Mark Barnes sitting on the cafeteria. They go to Cable and go to the railway for a hire job. Because I think it's in the station, yeah. And her sister just knows up until
Here I am passing through Harmon's Cross on one of the express services that ran non-stop between Swanage and Corfe Castle. I believe that most, if not all of the journeys that the full vet did, skipped Harmon's Cross and Hurston Holt and did not make any stops at those stations.
Yeah. So that recently, and I had a falling out with a brother-in-law. So she went to see the sister, and I went to Alsham. Yeah, it's
Here is 56090 in a very staggering coalless rail freight livery, leaving Corfe Castle on its way to Norden, which is just 2 minutes up the line and is quite obviously the next station. Here I am having a look around Corfe Castle Station, which serves the village itself as well as the castle and the local area. Here we can see the beer festival, which at this point was in full swing. If you want the best views of Corfe Castle though, don't go to Corfe Castle station, instead head one stop up the line to Norden, where you can get great views from the bridge overlooking the station, or take a train heading towards Norden, where you can get some amazing videos and photos of the castle whilst you're heading north up the line. Anyway, I'd be heading south down the line towards Swanage, and my next train was the Class 69, which I actually quite liked. Here is 69007, otherwise known as Richard Trevithick, arriving into Corfe Castle Station, heading down the line towards Swanage. I'd be taking this all the way to Swanage, and the train itself wore a very nice retro GB rail freight livery. I did quite like this livery, although it was a little bit plain for my liking. Here I am leaving Corfe Castle on 69007, heading towards Harmon's Cross and eventually Swanage once again. Again, I was being held in the Corvette, which was quite a nice train. It's not great for filming. You can't put your camera or your head out of the window, since the windows have been limited and can only go up and down a certain way. Here I am passing through Hurston Holt again. This is the line's only request stop and does get used quite a fair bit. Maybe the West Somerset Railway, with their request stop at Doniford, should maybe come down to the Swanage Railway, since Hurston Holt is in a lot better nick and condition than Doniford Holt.
We've got drivers, fitters, guards, 2 retired depot managers, but I got involved because they needed someone to do woodwork, and I've done this for 41 years on the Bluebell as a volunteer, so got involved in this as well. There is, yes. So it's the Summerlink ectg.org.uk. Very active and Facebook page. Just starting off on TikTok. One of the youngsters has set that up. That seems to be going very well. So yeah,
I'll have a
good.
look at that.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Thank you. All right. Hello. Any questions about the unit time fast?
That's not a very good sign.
Here I am now at Swanage railway station. I did wander around the town, which is quite nice. However, just before I went into the town, I took this amazing shot of the old historic railway station, which just looks magnificent. Now, if you thought the train service was absolutely packed today, have a look at the local bus service operated by Moorbus. The amount of people waiting for both the 40 and the 50, which takes you to Poole and Bournemouth, was absolutely staggering. I know it's the summer season, but the summer services on Moorbus haven't even started yet, and there are already big queues for the bus services. Anyway, by the time I got back to Swanage railway station, a 50 service had pulled up at the station, which I don't think was an open topper this time, just a standard double-decker. But to be fair, at least the services weren't getting cancelled. That would have been an absolute mess if that happened. I am leaving Swanage railway station a few minutes after the Corvette, which did an express service which ran straight to Corfe Castle on the stopper service which calls at Hurston Halt by request and Harmon's Cross before getting at Corfe Castle. This train was pulled by 45-108, and this was my final train and my final service of the day. Here I am arriving into Corfe Castle. I'll take this train one stop up the line back to Norden where I started this morning. As you can see, the railway station along with the Bear Festival was now absolutely packed. Here you get beautiful views of the castle of which the railway station is named after. This is of course Corfe Castle. Even if there are just ordinary steam trains running or there aren't any trains running at all and you have to get here by car, taxi or bus, I do suggest coming to this area since some of the views of Corfe Castle and some of the views down at Swanage are absolutely fantastic. Here I'm arriving back into Norden where the transport is waiting. Now I'm back at Norden where I originally started. I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching this video and have a great rest of your day and look out for more great videos coming very soon. Bye everyone!